They can drop massive power-ups on literally anyone they want. And get this, they can even make them way stronger for good. After eating a few more meals, the dog actually started talking. This guy might actually be way too powerful for anyone to handle, but he's still super chill and doesn't let it get to his head. He's hiding the fact that he's actually a weak F rank, but I won't spoil the best parts. Let's just jump right into the story. Everything was totally trashed, leaving nothing behind but a massive pile of dead monsters all over the ground. The guy behind everything is wearing a black lizard skin mask and holding a crystal, while a boy and his growling dog stand there wondering if he's the one who started this whole monster disaster. 3 days before the monster chaos hit, a massive bear snuck up right behind the kid, who blasted him with a massive burst of fire magic. Suddenly, the massive bear just crashed to the ground. He was just sighing and getting annoyed when his kill got swiped, and now he belongs to Yuri, a bottom-tier Class F hunter. He sat down to watch a D-rank mountain bear, but since he's just an F rank, he wouldn't get any rewards for its parts even if he brought them back. Alright, let's talk about these goblins. Since over half their heads are totally smashed and useless, he pulls out a knife to at least grab the ones that are still in one piece. He stuffed the bag full and then used his fire magic to torch the bodies. Then he uses earth magic to bury them deep in the ground. Once he finished gulping down those dead bodies, the place is finally back to normal and totally clean, just like the guild rules demand. He slumped onto a rock and sighed at what a total pain this was, knowing a real dungeon would have just devoured everything in sight. He yanked off his glove and checked his watch, seeing he only had an hour before the gates shut, and since he was totally starving, he decided to quit stalling and get moving while he still had the chance. He reaches into his magic bag and pulls out a table, a stove, and a pot, showing off that he's basically got a whole kitchen hidden in there. He was starving and dug through his bag for some food, but he couldn't find a single thing to cook. He took a quick peek inside himself to check things out. He really needed to sort through his messy magic bag right away. Finally, he popped his head back out holding 2 pouches of ingredients. It wasn't long before he started whipping up a meal. It was a super filling bowl of soup loaded with chunks of meat and veggies. The second the food was ready, he started devouring it because it tasted so good, hyped that his cooking skills were finally hitting a whole new level. He was moving so fast he joked about quitting to open a restaurant, but he quickly shut that down, his laughter dying out as he realized how weird he looked, and that he definitely wasn't alone. Once he finished scarfing down his food, he kept scanning the area like he was waiting for someone, and it looked like the big moment was finally here. Just like that, a dog bolts out of the bushes right in front of him. Everest was waiting there with a plate when the dog suddenly rushed him, so he had to hold it way up high until the pup finally chilled out enough for him to set it down. The dog was happily munching away and wagging its tail while Eris checked the scratches on its back. And since the wounds were totally healed and the pup didn't mind the patchy, it's been almost a month since he first found this dog right after that massive monster hunt. He stepped out of the shadows looking totally wrecked, so he quickly patched him up and gave him some food. Ever since then, he always shows up out of nowhere the second Yura starts cooking. He's totally obsessed with cooking now. He spotted the bandage someone had wrapped around him and thought it actually looked pretty cool, but then he glanced at the clock and realized it was already super late. He used magic to clean his gear, shoved it all back in his bag, and told the dog to just leave the bowl there because he had to get going. He was totally lost, so Eurus gave him a gentle pat and promised that they'd definitely see each other again. He starts walking away, but then he glances back at the dog that's barking its head off at him. He knew something was off because just running normally wasn't going to get him there, even if he gave it everything he had. His hair tips change color whenever he uses speed magic, so he bolted out of there before anyone could spot him. This magic is basically forcing his body to move in a super specific way, which is why he's acting like that. Even after making that weird noise, he was totally clueless about why it happened. Over in Ryan L Town, a guard warns Gilius that the gates are about to shut. He begged for a bit more time since Uruk wasn't back yet, so the annoyed guard told him his buddy better show up before the sun goes down. Julius spotted Eros sprinting toward the gate and told the guard he was back, while Eros apologized for being late. Gilius just told him to relax and head inside, because he's actually Everest's personal guard and best friend. The guards mocked Urus the second they walked in, thinking he was a total weakling who'd just been out fighting goblins again. Gilius grabs Everest in a hug and laughs, telling him the other guard is just grumpy from a fight with his wife, making the guard shout that he can hear everything. Gilius totally brushed him off and just asked how the hunt for Eurus went today. Honestly, things didn't go great since he got cut off, but Gilius just laughed it off and gave him a pat on the back, and even though he ran into a high-level monster, Everest headed off to the guild, telling Gilius to hit up Ferris's shop before finishing for the day. But Gilius just sighed about his night shift and decided to wait for his break to visit instead, while Everest just waved and walked away without another word. As soon as Everest walked into the guild, the other hunters started clowning on him. They call him the Goblin Slayer because he only hunts goblins, and he's ready to wipe every single one of them out. But Eurus didn't care at all and just said it's never going to happen. He walks up to the counter, and just like always, the guild receptionist is right there to greet him. He handed her a bag to prove he really took down 13 goblins. He leaned over the counter and told her that with way more monsters and way fewer goblins lately, he's not getting nearly as many kills as usual. She grabbed the hunter reports and flipped through them, confirming that weak monsters were popping up everywhere lately. And since a mountain bear had just wiped out a pack of goblins, Eris's wallet was definitely feeling the pain. He tried his luck asking for a reward for the D-rank monster parts, but Shirley shut him down instantly, and he totally expected it since rules are rules. Shirley nervously asked if he was planning to rank up, and as Everest thought it over, he realized reaching rank E meant he'd finally need to find a squad. He's totally trash at putting teams together, but she didn't even care because he's strong enough to solo C-rank hunts without breaking a sweat. He's a total loner, but suddenly this jacked dude walks up and asks if he's still out there hunting weaklings. It was the Azure Dragon boss Bagan himself, with an elf grabbing his left hand while a dark-haired kid and a bearded guy in armor stood right there on his right. This dark-haired kid points right at Yaris and asks how much longer he's gonna keep mooching off the guild. The elf girl just laughed at how shameless he was, especially since he caused Baganu so much trouble when he joined, just because they refused to listen to him. He warned him to stay sharp, but the dark-haired guy snapped back that he was totally caught off guard, and since he just stood there like a total moron while they retreated, he'd be dead meat right now if Bagana hadn't saved his life. Everest looked up at Bagan, who was totally avoiding his gaze, and you could just tell something shady was going on. Eris shuts them down because he thinks they'll just slow him down, making the dark-haired kid snap that a weakling who only hunts easy targets has no right to talk so big. If he doesn't join the squad, he's gonna be stuck at rank F forever, so we need to see if he's actually down with that. Everest looked away and agreed, figuring it was way better than dealing with more drama. Bahan was seriously about to lose his cool. The old man starts screaming for everyone to pipe down and asks what the heck is even going on. It was Glingal himself, the big boss in charge of the whole guild. He looked over at Everest, realizing it was him causing trouble again, but Everest just shrugged and blamed Bagan's crew, making Glingal so mad he slammed the railing and told. The entire first floor went dead quiet, leaving Glingal as the only one making a sound. He told Bagan he was lagging behind since the whole squad was already waiting, so Bagan apologized and told his team to stay put. Glingal started heading out and told Eurus he was tagging along too. Shirley knew exactly what was up and shut it down, and even though he was gonna wait, he changed his mind and decided to settle things right now. She tried to speak up, but Glingal totally cut her off and threatened her to shut up and just do her job. Everest asked what was happening, but Beggin just told him to quit stalling and get over there. They stepped into the room and spotted the Guildmaster Glingal sitting right at the head of the table, surrounded by a bunch of other hunters. He's running the show as the Guildmaster, with every single A-rank hunter backing him up. Glingal just made it official. Urus is kicked out of the city and he's never coming back, making him shout out in total shock. Back in the forest, there's this creepy dude with only half a face. Right there in the dungeon stood a mysterious guy wearing a creepy black lizard mask. All kinds of monsters started crawling out of the black goo covering the floor and walls. Before long, he had a massive army of monsters and ordered them to march out and wreck everything in sight. Everest was totally lost at the meeting and asked why he was suddenly getting kicked out. Geoford, the leader of Bright Hope, basically told him they don't need a guy who only knows how to hunt goblins, and Sir Wilhelm from the Dawn Knights even heard that his obsession with weak monsters is totally wrecking the training for the new recruits. Glingal asked how long it's been since he became a hunter, and Urus told him it's already been about a year. While everyone else gets promoted and joins the squad in 3 months, Eris was still stuck grinding goblins every single day, so he had Riku say this. Rika, the head of Intel, checked the report and saw that goblin numbers crashed to just 20% of what they were last year, making it impossible to train new recruits, so the leaders all teamed. Ankh, the boss of Shin Phantom, said he'd gone too far, but didn't really care, since Shadow Corps' leader Aiko was missing, and Bygone from the Blue Dragon. Yaris tried to explain that for every goblin he kills, another one just spawns back in, so his solo hunting shouldn't really be working. But Glingal cut him off and pointed out that their numbers are actually dropping fast. Everest noticed way more D-rank monsters popping up lately and asked Rika if she knew why, but she just looked away and started stuttering because she totally forgot to report it. Gifford says that right now, he's basically just... He shamelessly tried to pin the blame on everyone else, but since he had zero proof, his excuses failed, and Glingal gave him just 3 days to pack his bags and get out of the city. The Guildmaster and the leaders headed out, leaving Jerusa all by himself in the room. Maybe he just wasn't cut out for this, and Shirley was outside totally freaking out while she waited. Bahan walked right past her and actually said sorry, which totally caught her off guard. He just asked her to give Everest the heads up, but she was totally lost and asked him what he even meant. If he's got something to say, he can say it straight to Evros's face. Bahan didn't even say a word. He just turned around and walked away. Everest stepped out and ran right into Shirley, asking her what was up, but she just acted like everything was totally fine. Euros just scratched his head and told her he was getting kicked out, while Shirley apologized because she tried to stop them a bunch of times, but they wouldn't listen to a word she said. He told her not to sweat it since he was the one who broke the rules, so he'd take the fall for everything. Everest thanked her for having his back, waved goodbye, and bolted to find Ferris before she shut down the shop for the day. The moment he walks inside, he's greeted by Ferris, the waitress and the famous poster girl of the diner. Evras sits down and says sorry for being late, but Ferris just walks over, tells him to chill with the manners, and hands him a salad. Then she drops a basket on the table with 2 jars of mayo she got from the NASA General Store. This was exactly what Eurus had been waiting for. He pops the jar open and dumps it straight onto the salad. He took 1 bite and was basically in heaven because that Heinz mayo was super rich, creamy, and honestly the best thing ever. Ferris was totally vibing with the sauce and said the mayo back in the capital just doesn't compare, because while the store-bought stuff uses whole eggs, this version only uses yolks to make it way richer and tastier. Ferris saw how hyped he was and offered to order more next time, but he shut her down because he knew there wouldn't be a next time. Ferris was totally blindsided when he heard he was being kicked out of the city and demanded to know what was going on. Everyone blamed Yaris for pushing himself way too hard, hunting goblins solo and making things a mess for the team. But Ferris shot back that these monsters are like roaches. You kill one and two more pop up, so their numbers aren't dropping that easily. This totally ticked her off, so she rolled up her sleeves and stormed toward the door to give them a piece of her mind. But Urus grabbed her dress and stopped her right there. He told her everything was cool since he hadn't even been promoted yet, and even though Ferris knew he was a total loner, she was sure the guild was still strong enough to have his back. She sat there with her arms crossed, totally over the guildmaster's selfish attitude, especially since everything's been a total mess since he took over 2 years ago. Urus asked if it was legit, and sure enough, the guy still hadn't shown up yet. Glingal started slashing the budget, fired half the guards, and jacked up the taxes even higher. Even though their city was safe from those crazy dungeon outbreaks where monsters flood the streets, he still totally went overboard with his slicing. 2 years ago, it was only a medium-sized deal, and word is the next one won't happen for another 10 years. That's probably why they slashed the budget, and Ferris told him to stop looking so impressed since that's exactly what got him fired. And man, she was totally right. Everest flips open his notebook to mark down 13 more kills, bringing his yearly total to 855. But hitting that 1,000 mark is starting to feel like a real struggle. Ferris points at a weird mark in the notebook to ask what it is, but it's actually just how he tracks his total kills. Every mark stands for 5 to make counting way faster. And Ferris got so interested he asked if the shape actually meant something special. The elders back in Urusa village taught him this symbol for justice, and now she's asking what language it's even from. Gilius popped up out of nowhere asking for a snack, but the second he heard Eris was getting kicked out in 3 days, he slammed his fork right into his steak. Ferris thought the whole thing was crazy, and Gilius agreed. But even though Urus was doing his job, that old man was taking things way too far just because he hated him. So when he and Ferris tried to storm out to protest, Urus snatched them and refused to let them leave. Back in the woods, Rick is just sitting there grinding out his reports. A scout just reported 10 orcs, 3 mountain bears, and 2 gargoyles in the northeast forest, confirming Rika's hunch that rank D monsters are seriously on the rise. She whipped her head around the second she heard those sounds coming from over there. He ducked behind the bushes to spy on what was going down. He spotted a whole pack of monsters moving through the forest. Her face went totally white when she saw it, and she knew things were about to get really bad. The next day, with the monster disaster just 2 days away, Urus heads back into the forest to find the dog. He handed him a basket of fresh sandwiches, hyped that he finally got the mayo he'd been waiting for and used it right away. Everest watched the dog dig up its food and start eating, knowing this was probably the last meal he'd ever give it, so it better enjoy every single bite. The dog looked totally lost, so Uru explained that after yesterday's guild meeting, he's officially been kicked out of the city. This might be the last time they ever see each other, but he couldn't just leave without thanking everyone who had his back. The dog just stared and left his food half-eaten, so Urus asked if he was full, but then a voice out of nowhere suddenly asked him if he was going somewhere. He sprang to his feet, shouted to see who was there, and then looked right down at the dog. He asked if he was finally done cooking for good. He was totally weirded out and asked the dog if it just talked, like he actually expected it to answer him. Luckily, it worked out, and the dog told them his name was Shishu. Evrusa's jaw dropped when she realized the dog was actually talking. Out of nowhere, Shishu jumps up and shouts that he's not a dog, he's Cobalt. They sat right across from each other, both with their arms crossed in a total standoff. Yera still couldn't wrap his head around the fact that Shishu was actually a magical kobold. They looked nothing like the goblins he expected because they were basically just a way cuter version of them. The note said no one had ever seen a kobold here before, making Shishu realize he was totally alone. and he looked down in sadness because a griffin had wiped out his entire family, leaving him as the only survivor. As soon as Juris heard about the griffin, an old memory clicked into place, and Shisha confirmed his hunch was totally right. That was the exact moment he stepped in and saved Shisha. Shishu was literally about to die until Urus saved him and stuffed him with food. So as Shishu tried to say thanks, Urus told him to chill and asked if his name was Shishu and who that master guy was he mentioned earlier. Shishu pointed to himself, explaining his name literally means glutton in Kobold. Then he pointed at Urus to show he's just the guy he chose to follow. Urus cracked a smile, finally getting why he had that nickname. But since he's ditching the city, Shishu decides he's just gonna tag along for the ride. He was totally out of options, so Urus finally made his choice. He stood up and reached out to Shishu, telling her they should stick together since it was just the two of them. Shishu was totally down for it, and they shook hands right away to seal the deal. Urus was dying to know how he just started talking out of nowhere, but Shisha was totally clueless. But after eating Urus's food, he slowly started to understand their language. Maybe he was actually boosting their stats without even knowing it. Buffs are usually just for boosting your strength or speed, but he never expected this magic to actually let him talk to a kobold. Shishu was hyped because his master seemed like a legendary wizard, and even though the guy was actually a total fake, they had to get back to the city and gear up for their big adventure. Bringing Shisha into the city was way too risky, so he told him to stay put outside, and Shisha was totally cool with it. Everest looked up and saw thick black smoke pouring out from the direction of the dungeon. Shishu asked what went down, but Urus didn't say a single word. He got a total chill down his spine and realized a monster was lurking nearby, so he followed its magic energy straight to the dungeon. Shishu called out to Urus again, and when he turned around, he was just grinning like everything was totally fine. And he finally started to back away. Ferris and Gilius grabbed a booth at the diner to talk all about Urus. Gilius didn't really believe they were cool with leaving things as they were, but they were totally stuck since Urus had already made the final call. Gilius is never gonna say yes to that, and Urus is just being way too nice because he doesn't want to cause any drama for the squad. They couldn't do a thing since he was already kicked out of the guild, but suddenly a voice shouts that he's actually still a member. It was Shirley. She said that even if the guildmaster kicks Urus out, he still keeps his license and can just join a new guild in another city. Gilius suddenly stood up and shoved his chair back, wondering if Shirley would actually drop it. He didn't think Urus deserved to be kicked out, and even though Urus hated Everest was a total legend who saved Gilius's little brother from a group of bullies the second he moved to town, and they've been best friends ever since. Ferris was totally in the dark about the situation, so he was dying to help Urus and refused to believe there was nothing they could do. Before Shirley can even get a word out, Urus suddenly pops up right behind her and asks what everyone is doing there. They were all stressing over how to help him, but Urus just told them to chill out and not worry about it. Ferris was already about to speak up and complain. Urus dropped his cool-looking bag and started digging through it. He really wanted to give everyone a little gift. He actually pulled out a whole... This magic box is way bigger on the inside, and since time literally stops in there, they can keep a massive stash of fresh food ready for the shop. Shirley cut him off when she saw how high-end the box and magic bag were, and since Urus made them himself and was giving them away for free, she didn't hesitate to snatch them up. He handed the pocket watch over to Hylias, who was totally caught off guard. He stared at it in total awe, and since it looked so high-end, it was clear he was the one who actually made it. Everest nodded and started digging through his bag, telling him to stop looking so worried now that they were back at the village since it really wasn't a big deal. Gilius spotted a button right in the middle of the clock and asked what it was, but Urus shut him down before he could even touch it. He said it was for the future, a total last resort if he ever got backed into a corner, and Gilius was dying to know what would actually happen if he pressed it. Eurus just says there's an exit, leaving Gilius totally confused. Everest went quiet, just warning him not to push his luck unless it was a total emergency, before finally handing the small bag over to Shirley. He actually made this charm himself after an old guy in the village showed him how, and everyone says it brings some seriously good luck. He wasn't really sure what to give her, but she was just hyped to accept his gift anyway. Now that he's finally over his past, he's ready to bounce, which totally shocks Gilius while Ferris tries to tell him there's no rush and they can still fix everything. Ursa's grandma told him to make his move now since he's getting kicked out anyway, and Shirley asked if he even had a place to crash. And he totally pulled it off, all because a merchant told him about a village way down south that serves raw fish called sashimi, and he was dying to try it. All they had in their town was smoked and dried fish. But this guy is seriously the most positive person ever. They walked him all the way to the city gates and said their final goodbyes. Everest gives a quick wave and just walks off. They ran into Shishu right there on the street, and the three of them just watched as he headed off. Shirley was super worried because the guild rules don't allow kicking Eurus out like that, and it was clear that Glingal was totally messing up. Glingal looked out the window and saw Shirley walking into the guild with another total headache following her, and he definitely didn't need any more people picking fights with him in this city. After that, he headed right back to the river. They started asking her all about what she actually put in her report. The river was shaking like crazy while reporting a huge wave of monsters, and Glingal got so fed up with her stuttering that he told her to just spit it out already. Rika's convinced this is a huge warning that a monster disaster is about to go down. They got hit by a massive disaster just 2 years ago, so they should be totally safe for at least another 10 years. The river warns that the magic around the dungeon is spiking, so they better stay on high alert just to be safe. Glingal didn't listen to a word she said because she was making bank and had zero reasons to complain. No way, this is impossible. That river definitely did something crazy. Right before that crazy monster disaster went down, Cabos the elf was just chilling and laughing with girls from all the different squads. Then, out of nowhere, Shirley just walks right up to her. She tried to get a hold of Bahan to ask him something, but Cabos just glared and told her Bahan was way too busy to waste his time on a nobody like her. Shirley didn't back down and totally spooked her, so Cabos finally gave in. Shirley walks into Bagan's room and catches him knocking back some drinks. He asks what she wants, but Shirley just tells him that Urus actually left the city yesterday. He actually said sorry to Eurus Didney once, but what did he even mean by that? Bagan chugged his drink and told her to stay out of it, but Shirley wasn't backing down and said she'd be the one to decide. The guild was acting totally crazy, kicking Eris out of the city just because he didn't have a party yet. He totally ended up on Glingo's bad side. Once you're marked, it's game over and you're completely stuck. Shirley thinks the guildmaster shouldn't be this powerful, and while the A-rank hunters are, if he tried to deny it, he'd still be totally cooked, so he just did whatever it took to stay alive. Who knows if she was actually mad, but he wasn't about to lose the spot he finally clawed his way into. Everest was way too useful to lose, so he tried to keep him safe and get him to join the squad, but the stubborn guy just wouldn't budge. She definitely noticed it too. Eurus was way too strong to be just some F or D ranker. Shirley noticed Bagan knew exactly what Eurus was capable of, so she asked him to give her the full breakdown. This all went down during the very first mission he ever took him on. The dark-haired kid is yelling at Everest to hurry up or get left behind, but Everest is too busy complaining about how heavy his bags are. Inside was a ton of gear like canned food, healing herbs, and weapon tools, making you wonder why they were even carrying all that stuff. Bahan shot back, saying that even though this move usually fails against A-rank hunters, he's actually using this fight as part of his training. Cabos points right at him and agrees to show this total newbie how missions work, but she's only doing it because her shift changed and she has no other choice. Bagan points toward a camp where they'll finally split up, but Cabos immediately starts trash-talking Urus, saying a weak rookie like him has no business being at a high-rank base. They kept pushing forward right down the path. Right at that moment, Urus suddenly got a bad feeling that something was totally off. He grabbed the bag and pointed right toward the main camp. All the dark-haired kid had to do was unload the gear and finish his missions. This was also the exact spot where Eris was supposed to stop guarding them. Eris got everyone's. The dark-haired kid and Cabos locked eyes and just started cracking up. She just sighed because this total noob has no clue the area is actually safe, and the only things left are weak F-rank monsters that run away the second they see you. But he's still acting like a total scaredy cat. Derriger noticed Urus looking super nervous, so he told him to chill out because this first mission was totally on their level. Right then, that monster from the hill finally showed up. He leaps down and totally smashes the Derringer. That monster was actually a chimera, a super powerful rank, a magical beast. Everyone else started losing it, but Bahan just ripped the axe off his back, wondering why a chimera would even show up here. The black-haired kid told them to ditch their bags and get their weapons ready. Bagan gripped his axe and shield, looking totally ready for battle. Suddenly, he felt another monster lurking right behind him. He couldn't believe his eyes. It was another freaking chimera. Suddenly, another chimera drops right into the action. Everest was just about to strike him when it suddenly lunged straight for the rest of the group. He had to stop his attack so he wouldn't hurt them, and Bagan told everyone to bolt while he kept the chimera busy. The others scrambled away, and now the remaining chimera was staring him down. He saw Urus was still hanging around and shouted at him to start running. He tried to land a hit before pushing the camera back, but his attack didn't do a thing. Since they were finally far enough away from Bagan, those two monsters smashed together and fused. Everest can finally use his powers and he lunges straight forward for them. He shuts them down and sharp wind magic sliced right through them and Eris crashed straight to the ground. Bagan was totally speechless and his crew peeked out from the bushes to see if their boss was actually okay. They stepped out of their hiding spot and totally freaked out when they saw the chimeras sliced to bits, which was exactly the reaction their leader expected. They started roasting Eris because they thought he was paralyzed with fear, but he didn't even bother correcting them since he didn't believe a single word of Bagan's story. He kept them totally in the dark, and while Bagan couldn't tell if he was being mocked, the guy's skills were so insane that it'd be a total waste to. But now that he's been kicked out, none of that even matters anymore. That's why he kept it a secret, because if the truth leaked, your whole party would be totally trashed, just like your dragon scales. She could talk all she wants, but since Eris never joined the squad, it was only a matter of time before Glingal turned on him and kicked him to the curb. Shirley finally gets what's going on. It turns out Bagan is totally ditching her for the big fight against Glingal. He says sorry because he's terrified of ending up wrecked. Rika sprinted as fast as her legs could carry her because she knew she just had to talk to Shirley. Bagan started to wonder if she even realized what was going on yet. Glingal would have kicked her out ages ago, but he's way too scared of how her fans would react. You definitely don't want to get on Glingal's bad side, because he's a total big shot who was personally handpicked by the royal capital to be a master. Shirley couldn't take another word and stormed out of his room, heading outside while stressing over the city her dad worked so hard to protect. She can't just stand there doing nothing, and right then, Rika finally finds Shirley and rushes straight toward her. She was gasping for air and totally freaking out, so Shirley had to settle her down just to find out what the heck happened. To top it all off, Rika warned her that a magical monster was about to cause a total disaster. This was the day the crush finally went down. Shirley was basically running the whole guild all by herself. She was scrambling all over the place because hunters everywhere were desperately screaming for her help. Once the madness finally died down, Shirley slumped against the counter, totally wiped out. But then Gifford suddenly walked right up to her. She stood up and apologized since the whole staff was on vacation, and after that awkward struggle, he leaned in and whispered that she was clearly way too busy to even talk to the guildmaster. Gifford saw her face and just smirked, telling her not to be so shocked since Glingle already knew she was breaking the rules. Shirley backed up in total shock, but Gifford kept going, sure that everyone taking a vacation at the same time was no accident, and Glingle definitely knew what she was thinking. Shirley asked why the guildmaster was acting so weird, and Gifford figured that since she was such a good person, it was better to keep her trapped than to let her leave. He started roasting her for being the old guildmaster's daughter, mocking her about how she's even going to survive now that her city has been totally taken over. She was dying to know why Glingle was acting like that, since all they wanted was to chill in this quiet town with a high-paying job as a top hunter and zero stress. The last thing they wanted was some nosy person snooping around where they didn't belong. Shirley tried to argue, but G4 just forced her to go along with it. They're gonna treat her right because she truly loved this city, the very same one her dad spent his life protecting. She shoved his hand away and warned him the crowd was starting to freak out, but Gifford just rolled his eyes and asked if she seriously trusted a total coward like Rich. Since a massive stampede already happened here 2 years ago, everyone figured they were safe. But when Shirley tried to speak up, Gifford shut her down with a cold glare and threatened to kick her out of the city if she didn't stop causing a scene. She's pretty much lost all her support, but meanwhile, things are getting crazy over by the city walls. 2 guards spotted thick black smoke shooting straight into the sky. Deep in the dungeon, there's a guy with half his face hidden behind a creepy, black, scaly mask. He was standing right there at the very heart of the dungeon. He stared at the crystal as it pumped out a ton of insane magic power. It shot straight up into the sky. The guards were totally losing their minds because they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Thick black smoke was literally taking over the entire sky. One of the guards named Gilius knew exactly what he was looking at. Everyone was getting totally crushed in a massive pileup. The guards immediately started ringing the alarm bells like crazy. And honestly, everyone who heard that was totally blown away. Hylias just started screaming at the top of his lungs. He screams that everyone is freaking out and tells the staff to get ready for a fight. Gifford was totally lost and tried to ask what was up, but Shirley just shoved him out of the way. They swung the guild doors open and saw the sky had turned pitch black. Hidden right there in that pitch black sky, a massive swarm of magic beasts just appeared out of nowhere. He pops out of nowhere and sticks the landing. The guard captain was totally stunned because there actually weren't that many of these beasts. They'd never seen a crowd freak out this bad before. So he told Gilius to call the Hunters Guild right away, but another guard suddenly cut them off while they pointed up at the sky as flying magical beasts carried the monsters through the air. They're crashing down from the sky, and even though he screams for everyone to start firing arrows, those monsters are way too fast and have already zoomed past them, and this massive A-rank giant just slammed right down into the middle of the city. They landed right in front of the guards, who immediately started rushing all the civilians to safety. Gifford thought it was all a prank because he claimed no one told him the place would be empty, even though Rika and Shirley literally warned him 1,000,000,000 times. Shirley charges back to the guild and storms into Glingle's office to report the chaos and ask for a plan, but Glingle just stays totally still. She finally walked up to him and saw he was totally drenched in sweat. He's shouting that this was never supposed to happen. Shirley swore it was the real deal, telling the guildmaster he had to get ready right now to lead the hunters and guards before everyone started freaking out. Glingle backed away and waved her hand, saying this panic wasn't supposed to happen for another 10 years, so it had to be some kind of mistake. Shirley warned him that monsters were already inside the city, but he didn't believe her at all, so he chose to stay in his town instead. She's way better off just handling this whole mess on her own. Julius walked into the guildmaster's office to get his orders, only to catch Shirley straight up slapping Glingal. He was a total joke of a guildmaster. He's just sitting there shaking in terror while she heads out, telling Julius to keep a close eye on Glingal so he doesn't try to escape. She marched down to the first floor and skipped the guildmaster, telling every hunter to grab their squads, gear up, and meet at the main gates right now. They spent days just staring at her, but the second she screamed for them to move, they totally panicked and scrambled away. Gifford walked right up to her and asked what was going on and what the heck happened to Glingal. He totally ditched his responsibilities, making Shirley wonder if he was really about to embarrass himself and just run away. Wilhelm's squad finally caught up to him and said everyone was freaking out, so it was time to step up and show those monsters what real knights are made of. But Wilhelm didn't even flinch and just stayed frozen in his chair. His teammates lunged forward and grabbed him by the shoulders. And that's exactly why his armor is totally falling to pieces. Turns out he already escaped and just propped up the armor to hide his tracks. Shirley headed straight for the main gate where the guards were brawling with an ogre, and even though Jaiaford kept pestering her with questions, she just ignored him and walked right into the fight. The ogre let out a massive roar and sent those guards flying like ragdolls. Shirley snatched up the sword and shield the guard dropped. They walk right up to the fence, and he immediately spots her standing there. It wound up its fist, ready to smash her. She blocked his attack with her shield, and the impact was so hard it actually popped the ogre's wrist out of place. That's when the ogre let out a massive scream of pain. Shirley saw her opening and sliced his other arm clean off. Gifford ducked behind the wall, totally losing it after seeing what Shirley just did. Suddenly, the whole city was crawling with monsters. Bagan and the hunters were busy holding them back, totally clueless about what was actually going down. Shirley sprints up to the city walls and asks the guard captain for the lowdown on what's going on. He asked her where Glingal was, so Shirley told him straight up that she's taking over because he's not coming back. The guard captain was totally shocked that Glingal was such a coward for ditching his post, but he knew everything would be fine as long as Shirley was there. He told her to look at the massive swarm of monsters taking over their city. The chaos was on a whole new level, and they were way too weak to stop it, but Shirley was sure they still had a moment before the main army showed up. They have to stop the enemies who broke through and get the citizens to safety. But the captain is totally short on soldiers, so he just points to the side. To make things even worse, they only had one single ballista left. Shirley was totally shocked by how many weapons they had, so he blamed Glingala and made excuses about budget cuts and old gear, leaving them with barely any backup. That snake said he would have sent a rider to the royal capital for help if he knew things would get this crazy. But now it's way too late. They're forced to go into full defense mode, so Shirley grabs a sword and tells the captain to get the civilians to safety, spread out his men, and block off the bridge. The hunters are ready to scrap with the monsters at the front gates, so they quickly set up barricades on the bridge and stand their ground right outside the entrance. Shirley makes it clear that they aren't letting that massive army of magical beasts anywhere near the city's main gates. The dark-haired kid and Cabos from Bagan's squad cut her off, arguing that the receptionist can't call the shots because if the guildmaster isn't around, Bagan is standing right there to take over. The hunters all started whining and getting loud, but that old guy from the Baggins party just bolted. He suddenly screams that the Valkyrie is back, making the whole room go dead silent as they stare at him, finally seeing the moment he's been waiting for his entire life. His teammates asked what his deal was because he wasn't acting like the guy they knew at all. He just gave them a piece of his mind. But since they only moved to the city 2 years ago, they had no idea that Shirley is actually the daughter of a former guildmaster, and there, She was the baddest A-rank hunter in Neonair who's wrecked tons of monsters. And after leading the charge in the last big war, everyone started calling her Valky. He didn't give up and kept waiting for her, and even though Shirley tried to stop him because she was so embarrassed, Bahan stepped in and totally backed Ransuf up. She was the only one who could lead them through this mess, and he promised they'd follow her lead. Shirley gave a nod and told the whole crew to put their lives in her hands. Right before they finally headed out through the main gates, a whole swarm of monsters came rushing straight at them. A bunch of hunters didn't believe there were actually that many monsters and thought it was impossible. Shirley pulled out her sword and ordered everyone to turn the bridge into a fortress. The mages and there was Rika standing right on top of the city walls. They're gonna blast the news over the speakers while her crew, spread out all over the city, keeps her posted on the evacuation and exactly where the animals are being moved. Shirley tries to say thanks, but Anka cuts her off because they've got to move right now. The fastest monsters were already on the scene, so Shirley told them to stay put and keep their guard up. Gifford walks in with a cocky grin and says he'll handle things himself, making all the girls scream because he looks so cool. He turns toward Shirley and draws his sword, refusing to. G-Ford pulls out his sword to face the beast, and he's gonna turn them all into dust with his epic blade. He gripped his sword and raised it high, ready to take down the beast charging right at him. That legendary sword finally snapped, and honestly, it looked totally lame. That monster just gave him a super cocky smirk. The weak guy looked totally pathetic as he dragged himself across the ground to get back to the hunter. He begged for help, but the girls just called him pathetic since he was all looks and no muscle, while a monster snuck up right behind the totally clueless G-Forged. Then Shirley just straight up stepped onto his shoulders. He leaped into the air and sliced that monster right in half. He started feeling like he was just being used as a stepping stone, while Shirley screamed for everyone to charge. The announcement rings out and the battle is officially on. Both sides are absolutely losing it and screaming their heads off. They both charge straight at each other for a massive head-on clash. Rika and the guards were holding it down on the city walls when she suddenly spotted something and looked straight up. Right then, Shirley and the hunters are booking it toward the magical creature. Plus, they've got wizards in the back row firing off crazy spells. River looked up at the pitch-black sky as a monster way bigger and scarier than the last one appeared, and she honestly couldn't believe her eyes. I made sure to give Shirley a heads up about what was coming. Gilius made it back to the city and started tearing through a massive wave of monsters. Just as he headed off to find Ferris and make sure she escaped, a winged monster dropped down right behind him. That hit was so crazy it got sent flying back. He stood up, super confused, and started looking all around him. He was totally paralyzed with fear, looking at that massive dragon. This thing is a legendary SS rank magical beast! Shirley looked back at the city gate, still feeling its massive presence even from outside. Right then, Bagan told her that a dragon had just showed up. A panicked hunter yelled that the gates were totally smashed, and Shirley immediately sprinted toward the wreckage. Ank stopped her from smashing it open, even though they were both terrified for everyone back in the city. If they had smashed through those gates, the whole wall would have crashed down and buried them. They'll have absolutely nowhere to run and won't even see it coming. The dragon started trashing the city and blasting fire everywhere. The whole street was just a row of burning buildings, and Helios stared in total shock, feeling like all hope was officially gone. He quickly yanked the pocket watch Eurus gave him right out of his shirt. Everest told him to smash that center button the second things start looking totally hopeless. He took a chance on him and slammed the button, praying it would actually work. Over in a different city, Urus and Shishu finally made it to the edge of the endless sea, a massive ocean filled with the tastiest seafood you've ever seen. They jumped up, shouted they were gonna feast, and then just poofed out of existence. Gilius snapped his eyes open, but he still couldn't see a single thing. He hit up Eris and complained that absolutely nothing was going down. He screamed so loud that the dragon looked right at him, and it leaned in close, getting right in his face. Gileas scrambled across the floor, desperately trying to get away. Just as the dragon's massive jaws swung wide open, right as his head falls off, Gileas opens his mouth when he hears a familiar voice asking if he's doing okay. It was Eurus, and she told Alex to blast Hey Daddy by Usher. Right in the middle of this massive fight for the city, Shirley told all the injured fighters to fall back and find the medics right away. The hunters stood guard so the crew could finally catch their breath and heal up. Bagan hacks a goblin in half and yells that they aren't even making a dent in the crowd, and there's no way they can stop them all. He just wanted to stall for as much time as possible until the regional defense force finally showed up. Right then, a total monster suddenly popped out of nowhere. It leaped out from behind her and started slamming her with its fists. She managed to knock the sword aside, making sure the hit didn't land full force. But it still got shut down anyway. She grit her teeth and slammed back onto the ground, looking more determined than ever. She drove her sword straight into the monster as it lunged right at her. She sliced it clean in half while blood started dripping from her mouth. As her vision starts to fade, she whispers an apology to her dad, realizing she might fail to save the city he literally died for. Out of nowhere, a massive dome slammed down and trapped the hunters' entire territory, chasing away those crazy magical monsters. The hunters were looking around, totally lost after that sudden spell hit. This person finally shows up right in front of Shirley and apologizes for being late. It was actually Urus and Shishu. Shirley yelled out in total shock, but Everest just flashed her a mysterious smile. He leans down to hand her the glasses. Bahan was totally shocked to see him since he thought Julius had already skipped town. But Julius called him back and the situation was way worse than he ever imagined. He totally ignored the confused Bagan and snatched the bag away, knowing he had to heal the squad and restock their gear immediately. Everest dumped out his bag, letting weapons, armor, and arrows spill everywhere, then gave Shirley a potion to totally refill her energy. She felt like the townspeople needed it way more, but Eurus promised her that he already had everything under control. Back in the city, the grandma finally pulled her grandkids into a huge hug. Just as the goblin was creeping up, they heard footsteps and suddenly the monster got smacked right back by a frying pan. It was Ferris, but he looked totally freaked out. She literally did whatever it took to make sure they got away. There's no way she's letting these monsters just run wild in her city. Suddenly, an orc with a sick mohawk pops out from behind the wall, and Ferris is so scared her legs give out and she collapses, knowing it's totally game over. She let out a scream and tried to bolt the second that spear slammed right through the orc's head. Hylaeus asks if she's all right, and Ferris just breaks down crying while still clutching her frying pan for dear life. She totally thought it was game over, but he calms her down. Hold up. Gileas flashes a huge grin as he shows off the epic armor Eris brought back, and with all these new potions and gear, they're basically going to be unstoppable. He kept telling Ferris to bail, but she wasn't going anywhere while people were still trapped, and besides, this shop belonged to her and her dad, and she wasn't about to let some monsters trash it. Gileas yanked off his own helmet and armor and strapped them onto her instead. The armor was magic and would keep the monsters away, and he told her not to worry because he actually fights way better when he's light on his feet. Ferris shouted after Frigilius as he bolted away, but he just told her not to worry and promised he'd definitely come back for her alive. Nope, that's not it. The armor was actually so heavy she couldn't even move, leaving her stuck on the floor just praying for someone to come save her. Just outside the city, a dark-haired kid from Kabos was in total shock that a rookie like Uraz could actually pull that off. But Rika stepped in to back him up and confirmed that he was telling the total truth. Everest is seriously overpowered and floored the dragon with a single strike, so Shirley finally let out a huge breath of relief. Rika says Yarus is the reason all of this happened, so they basically have no choice but to trust him. The moment she heard that, Shirley didn't even hesitate and slammed back the potion Eurus gave her. Suddenly, he started glowing with this insane, massive power that felt just like enchantment magic, leaving the dark-haired guy and Caboose just staring at each other in total shock. The second they spotted Shirley, everyone chugged the potions Eurus had given them. The second they chugged that crazy potion, everyone felt a massive surge of power hit them. Caboose was shocked he actually pulled it off, but even though the Arusa villagers taught him how to do it, everyone thought he was lying about doing the work himself. Eris totally ignored Caboose and told Bagan the barrier was about to snap. So when Bagan asked where he was headed, Eris just pointed at the magical monsters waiting for him outside. He's gonna take them all out, while the others catch anyone who manages to slip past him. Bagan tried to argue because there were way too many enemies for even him to handle. But since they had to wait for backup, Euros just gave a stubborn smile and said he was counting on. Before making a break for it, Shishu went straight after him. With all this space and a massive crowd to hit, he could finally stop holding back and just go wild. He slammed his palms together and unleashed his freezing ice magic. He snapped his eyes open and saw a ton of ice spears floating all around him. He flicks his hands and sends sharp ice spears flying everywhere. He lunged straight at the monsters and froze them solid. Then he busts out his earth magic too. He slams the ground, smashing those frozen monsters to bits and burying them deep under the dirt. Suddenly, the guy in the dungeon came to a dead stop for the very first time. He whipped around the second he felt a super weird vibe behind him. Right then, Eurus started absolutely unloading a non-stop barrage on that woman. These monsters are rocking an attack power of F. Right after that massive hit, he finally slammed back down onto the ground. He stared at his hand, wondering why he suddenly felt way more powerful than usual. He tapped his earpiece to check on Shishu, but Shishu told him to just stay in the city and not push himself too hard. Shishu leaped right between the two monsters, making them slam into each other. He told Eurus he was feeling super hyped after eating her food, but then he suddenly froze because a massive griffin was blocking the road. Shisha was totally helpless and couldn't do a single thing while his entire family was killed. He swore he'd never lose another fight, so he leaped into the air and bit the griffin right in the neck. With a quick crunch, his head just snaps and falls right off his body. The second Shishu finally touched back down on the ground. Eurus was totally hyped about his win, looking over at Shisha with a massive grin. He had to get back fast because the monsters were swarming, and no matter how many they took down, more just kept crawling out of those black clouds, making it feel like they were getting nowhere. He threw his arms out wide and he totally whipped out some insane light magic. A massive beam of light shoots straight up into the sky, but that hole just closed right back up like it was never even there. It's totally hopeless now that it's slammed shut again, so they've got to go straight for the source and take out the dungeon itself. He tells Shisha he's heading into the dungeon and needs to fall back to where Shirley and the rest of the crew are. Juris begged him to run because it was way too dangerous, but Shisha refused to leave and insisted he could still take them on. Shishu was dead set on them sticking together, and after Eurus saw those monsters, he realized it was way safer to just bring her along. He used a blast of wind magic to launch himself high into the air. He told Shisha to hurry up and hop on his back. They took to the skies and headed straight for the dungeon. Shirley saw the monsters were thinning out and ordered the hunters to finish them off while Azure Dagon led the charge. This is the big moment they've been hyped for, where they finally get to show off as Bagan raises his shield and tells his squad to let their powers loose. He charges straight ahead and slams the monster to the ground with his shield. But wait, the other guys are also starting to flex their insane power. But right then, Eurus finally showed up. They're heading deep into the woods to finally break into the dungeon. He uses that speeding wind to blast them straight into the core. The place was totally empty, even though he was bracing for a whole army of magic monsters to jump him. He skidded to a halt when he saw the path had totally run out and there was nowhere left to step. When it was all over, everything just straight up crumbled to pieces. The whole dungeon started falling apart, and Eris had no clue what was going on. Either way, they've got a straight shot right to the core. He used wind magic to drop down fast, and as soon as he landed, he saw a pair of double doors at the end of the hallway. He kicks the door wide open and bursts into the room. And right there stood a guy wearing a weird lizard mask. He turned to Eurus, who was super confused because this guy looked exactly like a dungeon boss. He couldn't really explain it, but he was starting to think that guy wasn't even human. It finally clicked for him why everything felt so different. And this whole mess was all because of Urus. Jairus had no choice but to blast her husband with magic just to shut him down. But the guy just swatted that attack away. He lunged forward and snatched Urus right by the throat. The guy was totally lost, muttering weird stuff that only made sense to him. Looks like Eurus and the hero are actually connected somehow. He didn't even get to finish what he was saying. Boshishu leaps into the air and smacks that mask right off. He let go of Everest and shoved Shisha away, quickly covering his face with his free hand. Everest was totally thrown off the second he saw the guy's face. This dude looked exactly like him, just with a totally different hair color. The guy slowly lifts his hand into the air. And slammed you against the wall with everything he had! Shishu saw his master coughing up blood and bolted straight to his side. He stepped closer and kept looking back and forth between the two of them. He was totally caught off guard, wondering why two high-level masters were suddenly standing right in front of him. He threw his mask back on while Urush checked to see if he was legit. He's officially the dungeon master now, and that's exactly what everyone calls him. If he's actually a dungeon master, that means he built every single dungeon in the world and triggered those insane monster stampedes. He literally built every single dungeon and was the one running them all. Everest shot a total death stare at the dungeon master for making things miserable for the whole group. But the DM just cut him off and claimed everyone was actually having a blast. Monsters crawl out of dungeons for people to hunt for food and survival, and he even made sure these places are packed with awesome loot that everyone's obsessed with. Every single bit of this was part of his master plan. Eris screamed that monsters were slaughtering people, but the dungeon master just acted like it was totally normal, saying that if humans hunt beasts, then beasts hunt humans back, and that's just how they coexist. He needed to figure out why Eurus was there and what he was planning, but Eurus looked totally clueless, like nobody told him a thing, which was actually perfect. He gave him one last warning. No matter what he did, humans and demons would never accept him. He's done here, so he's just gonna vanish with Shishu and stay all by himself forever. Eurus was making zero sense, and honestly, no one had a clue what he was actually trying to say. Right then, the crystal that looked like the dungeon's core just shattered into a million pieces. And just like that, it looks like every single drop of mana has completely run dry. The dungeon master was already gripping another core in his hand. Just swap out that busted core and that'll be more than enough. Now the dungeon is finally gonna settle down. This monster invasion is only happening because the dungeon's core is totally burnt out. But if they just swap it for a new one, the whole nightmare will finally end. He told Eurus they'd never see each other again and walked away, leaving her desperately trying to chase him down. But he'd already vanished into thin air, leaving the guy to curse in frustration while trying to figure out what was even happening. Shishu walked over and finally got him to chill out for a second. Everyone outside is probably freaking out, so they need to get out of this dungeon for a bit. Shirley looked around at all the monster bodies scattered everywhere. I was honestly starting to wonder if the whole thing was finally over. As the black sky finally cleared up, the hunters started cheering because they actually won and stopped that monster's crazy disaster. Bahan started heading straight for Shirley. They claimed the win, and then they heard that Shirley finally let her guard down and just slumped to the floor. She was totally loving it as she watched the whole thing go down from a distance. Up on the hill, a woman in a half-mask watched the scene, trying to figure out what just went down, but it looked like the fight was already over. This was Aiko. He walked up behind her and asked what happened, seeing that the magical monster was finally gone. The guy told them they should fall back and team up with the city guards for now. Back with the others, Shisha was begging his master Yoris to pick up the pace. They go charging straight through the dungeon doors. But those things were totally supposed to stay shut. They let out a massive sigh as they watched the dungeon door slam shut, locking them inside. Yoris was totally shocked to see the dungeon fixing itself, especially since they'd just barely escaped getting crushed alive. Either way, they really need to head back. That guy Aiko was talking to and his whole squad finally made it to the city gates. This is Hugh Aldrich, the big boss of the Regional Defense Corps, and even though he rushed over for an emergency, the mess was already handled, so Shirley just tells him she's part of the Azure Dragons. Mostly this dark-haired dude and Cabos were totally flexing and bragging they could take down every monster by themselves. Hugh just brushed them off and headed back to Shirley to ask where the Guildmaster Glingal was, and Julius was the one who finally answered him. He leaped down with Glingal slung over his shoulder like a sack of rice and slammed him straight onto the ground. Glingal was tied up and screaming threats, but Gilius just told him to shut up since the guy wouldn't stop trying to make a run for it. Glingal scrambled up, spotted Hugh, and dropped to his knees, begging him to arrest those fake traitors. They actually tried to step up to the Guildmaster, so now they're all getting kicked out for good. Shirley tried to explain herself, but Hugh just held up his hand and shut her down, saying he didn't need to hear it, which honestly saved them both a huge headache. He whipped out a letter and busted Glingal on the spot for faking the royal decree to become the Guildmaster. He was supposed to be the Guildmaster in Vent way out west, so what the heck is he doing that all the way in Nunira? The hunters around him started whispering, telling Vent that this was just a totally deserted farming village. Hugh kept going, mentioning he heard Glingal tried to run away during that insane monster attack. But Glingal insisted it was just a huge misunderstanding and begged for a chance to explain himself. Fine, the trial is going down at the Royal Capital's Supreme Court, so he orders his men to throw Glingal onto a horse and get moving. He wasted no time and did exactly what he promised. Gilius watched the whole thing with his jaw on the floor. He just couldn't wrap his head around Glingal being a... Hugh hopped off his horse and walked right up to Shirley. It was the legendary battle maiden he'd heard so much about, and when he asked if she was the one who led the defense, she told him straight up that it was her. She's definitely living up to her name as the daughter of the former Guildmaster Albert Drinton. They need to start rebuilding Nyanieri right away, but since they're missing a leader, he uses his power to make Shirley Drinton the temporary Guildmaster and asks if she's down for the job. She looked back at the hunters like she couldn't believe she actually deserved it. Everyone was all smiles, and Bahan even told her it looked totally perfect on her. And that's exactly why she finally said yes. The hunters started cheering like crazy. That's when she locked eyes with Eurus right in the middle of the massive crowd. He just flashed her a quick thumbs up to show he was good to go. That instantly put a huge grin on her face. 2 weeks have passed with Shirley leading the rebuild of Neonir, and Gilius is totally confused when he hears that Eris is already planning to leave town. Eurus decided it was finally time to move, and even though Gileus asked why since his exile was already over, Eurus just flashed a smile and didn't say a word. They whipped their heads around the second they heard people coming their way. Shirley and Ferris showed up, and Gilius was totally caught off guard by Shirley's fresh new look. The whole town is saying that since she's the guild leader now, she's got to start dressing like a real boss. Ferris sighed because Shirley can't really lead anyone in that receptionist uniform, but then Yaris gave her a compliment and she totally turned red. Ferris looked super proud as he announced that Shirley was officially becoming the guildmaster, especially since the guy who was supposed to take the job decided to ditch it for a quiet life in a peaceful town called Went, where there aren't even any monsters to hunt. So the guildmaster and Neoneer spots were totally empty. That's when Hugh Aldridge from the Defense Force stepped up to recommend Shirley. Gilius was actually hyped to hear the news. Shirley asked Eurus if he was really taking off, and he told her it was for real. Ferris suddenly got an idea and snatched Gilius away, telling him they had business to handle, and even though he was totally confused, she just wanted to give Shirley and Eris some private time. Julius just gave a quick wave as Ferris dragged him away, while Eris smiled and gave a quiet wave back. Shirley sat right next to him, and Eurus knew he was staying put because she personally blocked the order to kick him out of Glingal. He still remembers the exact moment he ditched his old life and finally rolled into Neonera. Every face and place was totally new to him. It was a struggle, but he snagged a job and thought he could finally settle down. But things went south fast. He kept picking fights with. That's when it hit him. He actually knew nothing about this world, the people in it, or the monsters lurking everywhere. He looked pretty annoyed as he thought back to the master of the dungeons. So he finally made up his mind and set off on his big adventure. He's finally making his move toward Narant, sticking to his original plan because it's the best place to start. He's still totally obsessed with sashimi, so Shirley caught on and handed him a letter. She knew he'd pull a move like this eventually, so she was already prepared with a recommendation letter from the guildmaster, Neoyer. Because of this, signing up as a hunter in Narenka is going to be a total breeze. Eurus thanked her and stashed the letter in his magic bag. Then Shirley told him to find a girl named Ninya who would totally look out for him, and she even handed him a big pouch of gold coins. This is what he gets for his part in the total chaos that monster caused. He took down way more than 1,000 monsters, but that still wasn't enough to cover his debt, so he'd have to pay off the rest bit-by-bit. He was just a weak F-rank who shouldn't have gotten a dime, but she used her power to bend the rules and hook him up anyway. Eurus just grabbed 1 gold coin and said it was plenty, giving the rest to the city's rebuild fund since Glingal had already left them totally broke. Shirley tried to defend herself, saying they'd already given back Glingal's stolen taxes and were getting paid by the capital. But Eris just cut her off with a smirk. She totally got what he was saying and promised to be smart with the money, but right then, the bell cut them off. The big moment was finally here, so Shirley stood up and told Eurus it was time for him to leave. Now it's finally time to honor all the friends they lost along the way. She stood right there with the hunters, staring out at an endless field of graves. That monster's attack took out so many people, but even though the survivors will never forget the horror, they're refusing to give up and are determined to keep pushing forward. They're doing this for everyone they lost, making sure those sacrifices weren't for nothing. After saying his final goodbyes, Eurus finally hit the road. He told Helios to use that pocket watch to let him know if anything went down. Gilius suddenly remembered something and pulled Everus away from the girls because he was actually about to confess his feelings to Ferris. He felt like they were finally super close, so he told Eurus he had to be at his wedding, and Eurus gave him a nudge and promised to show up while Ferris asked what all the whispering was about. Hylius brushed it off like it was totally nothing, just as Bahan walked up to ask Eurus if he was actually leaving town. He totally was, but first he tried to apologize for all the mess he made, only for Han to tell him to stop being such an idiot. That guy seriously needs to say sorry. He lowered his head and gave Eurus a real apology. He even left his own crew totally shocked. Bagan knew Everest was hiding some insane power, but he kept it a secret to recruit him for the Azure Dragon, even if it meant letting the guy get exiled. He dropped to his knees and admitted that all this insane destruction was totally his fault. Everything went south because of his stupid pride, so Eurus grabbed his shoulder and told him straight up that he was wrong. He knew his wild fighting style was a total danger to his friends, so he always felt way better just handling things solo. He never explained why, but even though hunters are supposed to stick together, he told everyone to stay out of it so he could handle the whole thing himself. He forced his own selfish rules on everyone. They only made it through that monster-filled nightmare because nobody quit. You can't blame Bagan for what happened, and Eris wasn't. Bagan grabbed his hand and said sorry to him and the whole squad. Yerus says his sorries and starts heading out, but as he waves goodbye, Shirley calls out to remind him that Naya Naya is basically his second home and he's welcome back whenever he wants. Eurus flashed her a grin and started to head out, but then he suddenly stopped like he just remembered something. He actually came back just to make sure Gilius didn't forget his wedding invite. Gilius's face turned beet red as he yelled at him for spilling the secret and started chasing him down, since it was finally time to head out. Everest triggered his speed magic and took off, leaving Gilius totally in the dust. Right then, the Dungeon Master headed deep under the waves to meet the Sea King. The Sea King took one look at him and knew exactly who he was. He laughed at how low he'd fallen, calling himself the Master of the Dungeon. The Dungeon Master totally ignored him and warned him about Eurus, who looks exactly like him. He finished up and said goodbye, but the Sea King just smirked, thinking this guy had no clue who he was messing with or what kind of dangerous game he was really playing. He's the Sea King Leviathan, the one true boss of the entire ocean. They finally reached Narenta and caught him some awesome sashimi, but things got tricky when Shishu started complaining about being hungry. But Eurasius is still out there with absolutely zero fish. This all kicked off just 3 hours ago. After all that, the duo finally rolled into the town of Narent. First, they had to track down the Hunters Guild to sign up, and then it was straight to the snacks. They're just making their way through the busy city streets. The dog is sniffing everywhere trying to figure out that weird smell, but it's just the salty ocean tide, and he'll totally get used to it in no time. Everest caught the hunters spying on them and immediately dropped low to hide. Tell Shisha to pipe down, because if the city finds out he's actually a kobold, they're in for some major trouble. The second they finally hit the shops, suddenly, Everest collapsed and started having a massive seizure. The counter was totally loaded with all kinds of fresh seafood. Wait, hold on. There's basically nothing left. Eurus hit up the seller to ask about that sashimi the whole city was hyped for, but the guy just stood there with his arms crossed. I could tell he wasn't a local, so I told him straight up that we don't serve fish to outsiders here. Eurus heard Narent was famous for its crazy good seafood, but the seller kept insisting they didn't have anything at all. Everest scratched his neck, feeling totally lost, and just asked for the way to the Hunters Guild. The seller pointed right at a small building just a few steps away. Just as Eurus was heading out, the merchant muttered that he picked the worst time to visit Narent, leaving Eurus totally confused as he stepped inside the guild. As soon as he steps inside, every hunter on the first floor locks eyes on him, and the whole room gets super intense. Everest walked right up to the counter and gave them a super polite greeting. I had this weird feeling that someone had already been there. This cat, or maybe it was a person, sat down, made sure they were noticed, and then stood up to face him head on. She had short hair and looked exactly like some kind of cat beast. Everest asks if anyone's working the desk, and when the woman says she's the receptionist, he calls her Niña, leaving her shocked that he already knows her name. He reached out and handed her the letter Shirley had given him. She felt something was off, looked around in total shock, and spotted Shisha right there by the counter. She freaked out and screamed when she caught a weird smell and finally saw the dog, so she told the hunters on the first floor to get Shisha out of there right now. Eurus tries to explain that Shishi is just his partner and they aren't there to cause trouble, but Ninya absolutely hates dogs because she thinks they're smelly and look totally stupid when they try to lick people. She barked an order to throw him out of the shop, so Eurus apologized and told Shishu to wait outside, and he listened instantly. The ninja read the note and groaned that some annoying dude had shown up, so he decided to just take him out fast. She froze when she saw a letter from Shirley, and after reading it, she looked right at Eurus. He felt pretty awkward and asked about the sign-up process, so Ninya finally gave in and agreed to register him. He figured she didn't need to check with the guildmaster since she handles these tasks herself, and there was no point bugging her big sister over a tiny F-rank job. She gave a smug grin and bragged that her big sister runs the guild, but he picked the worst time to show up since there's zero work for hunters in Narini right now. Eurus asks why and says he's totally down to hunt goblins, but the ninja explains that land monsters never actually show up around here. His main job was guarding fishermen and wrecking sea monsters, and Eris was totally down for it. But since nobody can fish right now, the hunters are totally out of a job too. Lately, all the big fish have totally vanished, leaving only tiny ones near the beach, and when Eurus asked what was up, Ninja had absolutely no clue. Even if he tries to fish now, monsters are just gonna jump him and ruin his catch, and Urus is totally losing his mind because he was seriously craving some fresh sashimi. They're drying and shipping out every single scrap of food the people don't eat, but the city is still totally broke and losing money fast. She looked over at Eris moping on the counter and really started to doubt if he was actually as awesome as Shirley claimed. It's honestly wild because he looks so silly, but they can't even afford to feed the guy, so he's gotta get out of there and find a new city. Urus slammed his hand on the counter and refused to budge. He didn't travel all this way just to miss out on that sashimi. He's gotta figure out a way to get his dime. The ninja called a hunter over to grab a fishing rod. Then she handed it to the guy and told him he could catch small fish anywhere along the shore. So that's why he's just sitting there on the shore right now. He lets out a huge sigh because he hasn't caught a single thing, and since he's not getting any fried fish or sashimi otherwise, he realizes he's just gonna have to go out and catch dinner himself. Shishu wanted to use magic to snag a ton of fish, but Urus shut it down because he didn't want to get kicked out of the city for doing something so risky. Shishu was whining for some fish because he was starving, but Urus just tossed him some jerky and told him to chill for a bit. They're planning to catch some fish and fry them up with salt, but he's seriously doubting they can actually chill out like that right now. He was obsessed with finding that dungeon master who looked exactly like him to get some answers, but the guy had totally vanished. He suddenly remembered exactly what the game master told him. He couldn't stop wondering why they were so much alike and why he felt like he already knew exactly who this guy was. He says nobody's ever gonna accept Everest, and while the guy is definitely a social disaster, he's really not that bad of a person. That demon really shouldn't be talking like that because he knows exactly why his own kind hates him, and honestly, everyone in the village knows the truth too. Hold on. Just because the dungeon master is like him doesn't mean they're family, and he definitely isn't a long-lost brother since demons and humans aren't related at all. He was in total shock and felt like every single person in the village was keeping a massive secret from him. But it's way too late for that now since everyone is already gone, until Shisha suddenly snaps him back to reality by shouting that he finally caught one. He yanked that rod back instantly and scored a massive catch, so now the whole crew finally gets to eat. It looks like he hooked something massive, and he's pulling back on that rod with everything he's got. I was totally confused when I saw what they actually caught. It was just some fisherman, and he was totally knocked out cold. Eurus scratched the back of his neck while Ninja stood there totally lost, trying to figure out what was even going on. The fisherman finally opens his eyes, and it's actually Fuku, the warrior fisherman. He shouted out that Lord Kyoshin needs their help right now. Ninja was worried sick that something happened to his master, but Fuka snapped at him to use his proper title, Lord Gyoshin. The ninja scowled and told the annoying fishman to spill the details, so Fuka explained that the Sea King is invading and the whole ocean is about to fall apart. It's pretty embarrassing, but they're way outnumbered and can't do this alone, so Gyoshin sent him to go recruit some serious backup. Ninja asks who the Sea King is, and Fuka explains he's a total creep who calls himself the king of all sea monsters. He spent years hiding because he was terrified of Gyoshin. Ninja was super annoyed by the way he asked for a favor and demanded to know what they'd get out of it, while Fuka just scowled. They tried to keep their cool, but they haven't caught a thing lately because the Sea King's army is patrolling the area and scaring all the fish away. Ninja was totally on board since their lives were on the line too, and while Fuka was ready to jump in and help, a massive problem suddenly got in the way. They couldn't dive into the sea because they can't breathe underwater like the fishermen can. Fuka slumped back down feeling like it was game over, and even though Ninja really wanted to help, she was totally stuck, until Urus suddenly raised his hand and signaled he was ready to head out. He's got a spell to breathe underwater, so even though it's his first time diving into the ocean, he's totally sure he's got this. One guy just wasn't enough, and since he looked so weak, Ninja had no clue if they could actually count on him. I mean, he literally just showed up there today. Inya's big sister, who knows he's the legendary hero who saved the city of Neo-Nair. Let's make it even punchier. Right then, Urus just shrugged it off like it was no big deal, but Ninja was freaking out because the whole city was in danger and he didn't trust this random stranger until Nyanio reminded him that Shirley actually vouched for the guy. Since they were the only ones who could handle the deep water, she asked Jerus if he could use that breathing spell on the rest of the group, and he said it was totally doable. Casting spells underwater is a total nightmare, so they can only take 2 people, meaning Ninja is tagging along. She agreed instantly without thinking, but once it finally clicked, she totally panicked and asked why it had to be her. They can't just dump all the pressure on the new guy and need to see if he's actually legit, while Nina is literally crying for someone else to go because she can't swim. She's totally right, so Nyanyo asks Everest for a plan, and he decides to cast a spell on the boat and load it with ninjas. The plan was perfect and they were ready to get a boat, but Ninja got annoyed because everyone was acting like she'd already agreed to go. After talking for a while, Fuka asked if everything was finally sorted out, and Nayano told her that Urus and Ninja were already on their way out. She was stressed that the lack of fish was all because of Gyoshin, and Fuka totally agreed. If this keeps up, Gyoshin is basically finished. If they can just hold off the Sea King, there's still a chance, and Nyanio is praying they can help out even just a little bit. He told Fuku to make sure Ninja stayed safe and promised he'd look after her little sister himself. That finally chilled Nyanio out, because if the strongest fishman warrior Fuka said it, she knew she could trust him, but Fuka just looked away and told her to stop sucking up. They finally hit the shore and found a tiny boat, but the old man who brought it was seriously worried it wouldn't be enough. He's totally down to buy them a bigger, tougher ride if they want, but since it's just for 2 people, Urus figured this one was already plenty. A massive boat would totally give them away, and since he's using a magic shield, he figured a weak hull wasn't even a big deal. Everest pointed at the motor and asked what it was, so the old man teased him, asking if this was seriously his first time on a boat. He explains it's a magic motor that hangs off the back, and once you pop a magic stone inside, it spins to push the boat forward, making travel a total breeze. Fuka grabbed the rope at the front of the boat and asked if pulling it was really all he had to do to steer, and yep, the whole team was totally counting on him. Ninja hopped onto the boat, but she totally froze when she saw Shisha and asked what he was even doing there. Urus told Shisha he could just wait back in the city, but Shisha just stared him down and didn't budge an inch. When Urus saw he wasn't leaving, he figured this was actually perfect, so he told him not to push his luck before finally sailing away. Urus popped a magic shield over the boat while Fuka dragged it deep underwater, and Nyonya just gave them a quick wave. They figured Urus, the hero who saved Nyonya, was the secret weapon they needed to make their plan work. They made it across the ocean with their guide Fuki, and since the shield was holding up perfectly, they were good to keep moving forward. Ninja was super nervous about getting crushed, but Urus told her not to sweat it because he'd already cast a breathing spell to keep her from drowning. She's hoping for the best, but Fuka warns they're officially in the Sea King's servants' territory, so they need to stay dead silent to sneak past. Urus glanced back as the light faded the deeper they dove, but man, this underwater world looked absolutely incredible. His "I don't care" attitude is seriously getting on her nerves. The ninja girl squeezed her fists, just praying they'd actually make it to that underwater castle in one piece. But yeah, Everest asks Fuki what's going on, and it turns out the Sea King's servants have already spotted them. Everest scanned the area to see what was going on. He couldn't see a thing in the pitch black, and right then, Fuka screamed for them to push the boat to full speed. Suddenly, something slammed right into their magic shield. The ninja totally freaked out at the sight of a massive fish and started yelling at Footsie for not warning him about the monsters, just as Fuka screamed that it was already coming back for more. Urus said he's got this covered, so he just needs to keep moving. He used his magic to power up the motor and then zoomed right out from under the shield. Eros hit the motor with a spell, and the boat suddenly rocketed forward, breaking free from the spot. Shishu reaches out and hits up Yevris. Evris promised he'd catch up in a bit, so now she's the one stuck looking after Ninia while he's away. Now Evris is stuck all alone in the pitch black, and he can barely see a thing. He whipped around the second he felt a strange vibration right behind him. He whips around only to see a massive fish with its jaws wide open, ready to swallow him in one bite. Fuka looks back and sees they finally lost those guys, but Ninya is totally freaking out about Urus jumping in alone until Shishu tells her to chill because the guy is a total beast. She was just about to ask how the heck he was even able to talk. Fuka shouts out that they finally made it to the underwater castle. Fuka dropped the anchor to make sure the boat stayed put. He told the pair to stay put while he headed off to track down Urus. He was totally shocked to see Urus already back, and the guy didn't even look tired. He's actually okay, but Ninja totally thought it was game over when he rushed out there by himself. Fuka asked how he escaped that giant fish, but he didn't just run away. He actually took the whole thing down. It caught Urus off guard and swallowed him whole, but he used his ice magic to rip the monster apart from the inside. And you probably thought that was just straight up insane. Eros finally got the hang of fighting underwater, but just as he started to back away, Fuka suddenly called out to him. He totally misjudged Eros, but seeing him stay behind for his friends proved he's a real warrior who deserves some serious respect. Everest tossed him a quick thanks, but honestly, it wasn't even a big deal. Out of nowhere, Nina runs up and starts asking him all about Shisha. This was definitely no regular dog, especially since she literally heard him talk. Shishu says he's sorry, but Urus just pats him on the back and tells Nina that the whole situation is way more complicated than it looks. Fuka shut down their chatter and asked what was up, so Nina explained she heard Shishu talking, but Fuka just thought he was acting like a straight-up animal. They were both totally caught off guard, and Urus quickly backed him up, saying, Shishu is actually a super rare species who just acts like a normal dog to stay under the radar. The ninja thought it was a total lie since dog beastmen are so rare she'd never even heard of them before. That was enough. Kyoshin was already waiting, so Fuka told everyone they had to get moving. They headed into the castle with a bunch of goofy-looking fish guards trailing right behind them. Everest thanked Fuka for the save, and even though Fuka was totally lost, he just nodded like he knew what was up. He had no clue why Fuka actually had his back, so he just shrugged it off and followed her right inside. Eurus leaned in and whispered to Ninia to ask what Gyoshin was like, but she had no clue since she was meeting them for the first time too. She totally thought Gyoshin was gonna be some kind of legendary big boss fish. Iruza was totally panicking, picturing Gyoshin losing it over him wanting to eat his own and then getting ready to kill him. Fuka drops to one knee to tell Gyoshin the mission is a wrap, and a girl's voice chimes in to tell him he did an amazing job. The curtains around the bed slowly started to slide open. Suddenly, this massive woman shows up out of nowhere. They both freaked out when they saw just how massive that thing really was. Fuka told them to show some respect, but they just stood there with their jaws on the floor. Gyoshin introduces herself as the lady of this underwater castle and asks everyone to be polite when they talk to her. Ninia introduces herself and Eurus, and Gyoshin thanks them for showing up so fast after his sudden call. He looked over at Shisha as he introduced himself, but Urus quickly covered his mouth and tried to explain what was going on. But Gyoshin just flashed a big grin and gave Shisha a huge thank you. Fuka apologized for only bringing 3 people, but since the locals can't breathe underwater, they wouldn't have even made it there without Yuri's magic. There's no way their help is enough to stop the Sea King, so he hits up Gyoshin to figure out a real plan. She told him not to worry because they never asked for help from land dwellers to boost their power underwater. She starts by breaking down the crazy situation they're stuck in, explaining that this underwater castle is being raided by a villain calling himself the Sea King. She's been holding up a... Everyone's jaws dropped when they found out she kept that massive magic shield up for a whole month. This isn't just a shield. She's actually been making air inside the castle for 2 whole months. The ninja asks if it's really that serious, and Eris tells him it's a huge deal because keeping magic active drains mana so fast that a normal person would pass out in less than an hour just trying to hold a barrier. They had to move fast, and Gyoshin was just glad they finally got the message. Everest finally gets what's going on and asks if they just need to crush the Sea King, but Goshana says that's not the plan at all and calls out for Serena. Then a little kid poked their head out right after her. Outside the barrier, the Sea King Leviathan knew Gyoshin was cooking something up, but he figured a few extra people wouldn't change a thing. Their shield is hanging by a thread, and it's about to unleash a massive blast that'll wreck the fish people and their whole underwater castle. Once they're inside the castle, Ninia asks about the girl, so Gyoshin introduces her as Serena and tells the crew to get her back home on land safely. 2 months ago, soldiers found Serena passed out by the river and rushed her to the castle to keep her safe. She's from the river tribe, so the ocean would actually kill her. And Eurus was totally confused why a fish person wouldn't be fine in the sea. Serena's actually a freshwater fish who filled the castle with air to survive, and they were going to send her home once she got better. But the Sea King attacked right then, and now they have no way to get her back safely. Now they just had to bust Serena out and get her back home. But what was the deal with the Sea King? Gyoshin is stepping up to take him down all by himself. Fuka said no way because she couldn't even stand up, so the others were ready to give their lives just to stop the Sea King. She's the guardian of the sea and it's her job to protect everyone. But when she tried to move, her head started throbbing so hard she had to stop and hold it. Serena said sorry right away because she was totally convinced the whole mess was her fault. Gyoshin promised she was going to be the one to personally take her there. It's totally her fault, so Ninia turned to Everest and asked if he could fix this mess. He could totally handle the Sea King by himself, but he didn't want to crush Gyoshin's massive determination. Shishu thought fast and suggested giving Gyoshin that same potion from Nyoniri to hopefully get her strength back. They burned through all their best potions during that monster attack, And since brewing more takes way too long, Shishu told them to just start cooking food instead. He tells Gyoshin to try his master's cooking because one bite of Urus's food will give her a massive power boost. Shishu finally got his voice back thanks to that food, and that's how he totally crushed the griffin. "All right, Fuka, now it's your turn to show everyone what you've got." He actually asked to borrow the kitchen inside the underwater castle. But before Fuka could even say a word, the whole castle started shaking like crazy. Leviathan spammed a ton of breath attacks and laughed as Gyochan's magic shield started to crumble. They're all gonna swarm in at once and totally devour Gyoshin and the fish people. A whole squad of fishman warriors suddenly showed up, and they were all carrying weapons. To go head-to-head with the Sea King's army of goons, they had to stall for time while Gyoshin healed up and defend that underwater castle with everything they had. Fuka's really banking on Urus to pull this off as he, Ninya, and Shishu are hauled into the kitchen of the underwater castle. He's met by the chef, a wild-looking fishman who looks exactly like a sea devil. She looked way more like the Lord Gyoshin he'd pictured, and the chef asks if he's actually cooking for the man himself. He wasn't sure he could pull it off since none of their gear was meant to be used by just one person. She's totally right, that frying pan was way too huge. They had to keep cooking meal after meal because Gyoshin eats like a total beast. Everest had to juggle a bunch of different spells all at once, but when he leaned down, he spotted a fire burning on the stove, which was super weird since this whole place is... She pointed up at a magic gadget on the ceiling. Since eating raw fish forever is super lame, they fired up the Magitech to fill the kitchen and dining room with fresh air. This really frees. She suddenly bursts out laughing, slaps Eris on the back, and tells him he's hilarious because they eat cows and pigs too. The ninja still had no clue why Uru was even cooking, even though the food gave him some insane power-ups. It basically refills your energy and mana while boosting your attack power and a whole lot more. Ninya asks why he doesn't just use healing magic if he's so good, which totally confuses Ura. It seemed like his food worked by accident, and Ninya was getting super suspicious after his vague answer, but Shishu backed him up and said that's actually how he learned to speak. Anyway, the massive attack on the Sea King has already kicked off, and now he's finally stepping up to start cooking too. Fuko's fishman warriors kept the fight going strong outside the barrier. He told them to hold the line and let the runners go, because their only mission was to keep that underwater castle safe. If Gyoshin gets back on his feet, they can totally flip the script. But right now, they just have to hang in there and give it everything they've got. The ninja headed back to the kitchen and asked Uru what she put in the food, because a regular human portion definitely wasn't going to be enough. The cook says they're low on seafood because that Sea King attack messed up their supplies, but Eris isn't even going to touch the stuff. He's never cooked a fish in his life, so he's got absolutely no clue where to even begin. So he just used what he had on him, and since he's always loaded with ingredients, he never stresses about food. So when the ninja asks where it is, Urus just tells her. He needs fire, wind, water, and physical magic, but he's totally gonna pull it off. He rips the bag open and dumps everything out. He had all his food stashed away in there. He sliced the meat and veggies into perfect pieces, fired up the magic tech, dialed in the heat, and poured in a ton of oil. The ninja called him out and asked what he was even doing. It was clearly just a basic stir-fry that looked totally boring. And even though Urus apologized, they were so low on time that she couldn't have made anything better anyway. He's totally rushing the cooking, but the result is still gonna be the exact same. Outside, Leviathan was totally cracking up. Just like he thought, Gyoshin is hiding, and she's probably losing energy from keeping that magic barrier up. He's gonna love making her suffer every second until he finally gets to finish her off. Urus heads back to the kitchen to season the stir-fry with salt, pepper, and his secret spice. But right as he's cooking, his hair starts turning completely white. The ninja asked if he was good, but he told her he was totally fine, and that his magic just does that, so she didn't need to worry about him at all. Shishu watched him closely, thinking back to the dungeon master and realizing they weren't just similar anymore. They were straight up identical. Once Eurus finished cooking, he told them to grab a plate so he could dish out the food. Inside Gyoshi's place, a bunch of weird fish monsters serve up a massive plate of stir-fry. Eurus said sorry for the wait, but his legendary giant fried meal was already served up and ready to go. Goshen was hyped to finally taste surface food again, but Eurus told her to eat fast since they were in a huge rush. Gyoshin grabbed the plate and chopsticks, and even though it was a massive meal, her hands made it look like a tiny snack, showing off just how huge she really is. Goshen started digging into the stir-fry Eris whipped up. Just a few bites later, and things start getting crazy. She was totally blown away and said it was honestly insane. She felt this crazy power surging through her and totally demolished that food in just 2 bites. Ninja totally called him out for not pulling his weight, but Hyoshin promised them that this was actually way more than enough. She finally managed to pull herself back up. The fish folk erupted in cheers, and Gyoshin thanked Evresi for the awesome meal that totally recharged her. Now she's finally got what it takes to take down the Sea King. Fuka turned back to take one last look at that massive underwater castle. I'm honestly starting to wonder how much longer Eurus can even hang on. The shield suddenly vanished, and Fuka started freaking out, but Leviathan just laughed because Gyoshin was finally out of juice, and now he's gonna smash the castle and eat her alive. He was laughing like a total creep until a voice out of nowhere made him freeze. And that guy right there was actually Gyoshin. It's all coming from Eurus, who's standing right there on her shoulders. She faced the shocked Leviathan and told him his days of acting like a big shot were officially over. Gyoshin just powered through the water and zipped right past Fuku. They told you to back off because they're taking over from here. Fuka thrust his trident into the air to get them hyped, while Gyoshin finally triggered her mermaid form. And just like that, her legs transformed into a massive mermaid tail. Everest decided to clear out the small fry so he could get straight to the king of the seas, and as soon as Gyoshin gave him the nod, he hopped right off her shoulder. A bunch of sea monsters jump him, but he's totally ready because they're on his turf now and there's absolutely nowhere for them to hide. He taps into his light magic and fires off a massive beam. Then he uses his ice magic to freeze those monsters solid. Leviathan was totally losing it, screaming Goshen's name at the top of his lungs. And then she just straight up smacked me. He totally went off on her, demanding to know what she was even doing. She kept the pressure on and tried to shove him back, so now they're taking this 1v1 to a better spot to finish the fight. And that's where Chapter 14